right. So from last week, what we were discussing now, I'll pull up a random chart so that we can have some space. Okay. With these lessons here, we're discussing how to prepare for what's coming for the next 9 years, especially. Okay. I've discussed some things and there are still more things to discuss, but we're going to go through them all. So let's crack on. Let's start with where we were last time. So the famous triangle that I've called, well, I created now, the triangle of death. Let's discuss this. So recapping from where we were, starting from 1944, we know what happened with the Bretton Woods system. All right. In order for us to understand, where we're going, economically speaking, I think it's wise for us to know what happened in the past. So 1944, I'm starting from there. Now we could go back further back into World War One, but the Bretton Woods system. Okay, I'm gonna put the history here, and then also we had the famous event, you know, economic suicide. Okay, which is the end of the converted gold convertibility system. And then on top of that, this is where we are right now. So right now we're in a petrodollar system, okay, for the meantime. Okay. Now the title of the lesson, as I've been discussing, as I said, guys, I believe it's time to give, and I'm open up these Thursday lessons for as long as whatever, because this has got nothing to do with just, trying to build an establishment or grow a company or whatever. It's a lot bigger than that. Right now, as the stage that we're in a very, I wouldn't say necessarily unique time, but as I always say, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it is very similar. I say history rhymes. And reason being is, there are many paradigms you can see from different time periods, throughout history, which parallel to other parts of history. Okay. And so I'll be going down that road today. I wanted to lay the foundation last week of the triangle of death, and I'm going to put it back here so we can discuss this system that we have here and the need for why we are moving in the direction of aggressively going into assets. Now, as the Wealth Group Academy, we're about wealth. We're mainly traders. We always trade. Okay. And of course, trading, of course, is a fantastic tool that you can use to be able to understand and maneuver in, the world of money and currency. All right. So without rambling on too much, let's re-go over or discuss this area that we were looking to go through. So I'm going to put these things across here. Let's grab this. Make sure that we put what we have going along here for you to understand where we're going. All right. So discussing the US dollar now, why is the US dollar such an important thing in our discussion as I've been going along? Now, first of all, as remember, we are in 1944, the Bretton Woods system as we had it. Now, history has a funny way of revealing itself, the signs of future history and different things, but I'll come back to that anyway. But as we know, 1944, we had the Bretton Woods system. Before that, or what triggered this event, now over 700 allies of the US, okay, so different countries, Panama, you name it. There's a fantastic picture which is actually within one of the courses, can't remember which, but it's within one of the courses which shows you the picture of everybody gathered together. So Bretton Woods, which is in New Hampshire, we had that meeting to discuss, stabilizing a very, you know, a very stable monetary policy, or that was the aim anyway. Now, in this period, now I'm going to increase on the terminologies. Last week I didn't, but in this period where we're here, we had a very deflationary period. Okay. Now, the reason why it was deflationary, okay, as we talked about inflation, and I'll be building layers on top of this as we go on from weeks on end. Okay. So, in this deflationary period, what did we have? Now, whenever deflation happens, which is a cutting of interest rates, okay, I'm going to put this here, okay, decrease in interest rates. What in history, what tends to happen when we have a decrease in interest rate is when we have some sort of crisis, okay? To make it simple, there's always some sort of crisis that takes place. I put this a bit further away so that we can have some space, okay? So what happened, to trigger this deflationary period? Now we had two spikes of this, all right? And these were the two world wars. So the First World War, All right. So we had World War One and we had World War Two. Okay. Now, the Bretton Woods system, the breakdown of the Bretton Woods system and the failure of it. Now, what is this system, first of all, just for those of you who may have not heard of this, for a recap? Okay. Simply, what we had is that we had this kind of diagram where we have the dollar. Okay. In pictorial form, it helps to put it this way. And the dollar was nominated as the world reserve currency of the world. Okay. And so then we had other currencies pegged, okay, to the dollar. This was the system. However, what was important about this system, okay, which was, I call it a kind of a semi-gold standard system, if you want to put it that way. Okay, not completely a gold standard system, but somewhere around it. Okay, is that everything was pegged to, or the dollar was pegged to a specific amount of gold. Now, at the beginning of this system here, 1 ounce, which we call a troy ounce, was $35, as I spoke about last week. $35. So, in other words, in this system, which is called the gold convertibility system, instituted, all right, countries could do business together. They could, buy and sell different, things that they produce, or if they want to import something. Okay. So, gold, all right, and I put it here for you if you're taking notes, $35 per ounce. Okay. Now, is a troy ounce specifically. Okay. There's different types of ounces, so always remember it's a troy ounce. So $35 could be redeemed, or the dollars could be redeemed for a certain amount of gold. Okay. And so in this system we had here, other currencies, okay, could be redeemed into the dollar, and then from the dollar to gold, and vice versa. Okay, so this is the system that we had going along. And when we had this system, looking through history, we were in a deflationary period already. And deflationary periods always happen when there's a mass crisis, when there's mass unemployment, and etc. Interest rates are pushed lower to kind of boost spending and to kind of drive spending. Now, to put in short, now you be hearing me use these terms a lot, spending and stuff like that. Okay. And because as you guys know, I'm always the one to make my own terminologies or my own descriptions to describe things. I never want to be the carbon copy and say the same thing. I'm always a contrarian. So I always put definitions for anything I say that might sound a bit like, what is that? All right. So if we put this here, spending, okay, all right, which is the foundational principles of an economy. Spending, of course, will grow an economy because spending equals to more money, you know, more money in circulation. Now, this is not the same as more money in circulation because of quantitative easing, which I'll come to in a moment. But just in general, if you have more spending in an economy, there's more activity in the economy, there's more business going on, okay, buying and selling. This will lead to more employment. Now, a great example to think about this, or more employment or increased employment, sorry, employment. Now, before I put the fourth leg on here, let's just discuss this for a moment. So with spending, looking at spending, the more you spend, the more money is in circulation or in a flow. Okay. And that flow increases employment and stuff like that. For example, if more people have money, and let's say they were to buy a house, if they bought this house, okay, along with the house, they may want to, uh, they're going to need a moving service. They're going to need to, hire people to maybe paint. Okay. So with that one spending, it triggers a kind of an effect on other people's spending, which causes more people to spend. Now, those people who need to, say, for example, paint, need to buy paint in order to paint. And the people that create the paint also create it for people. So you can see that we have this snowball effect on spending. Okay. And spending is not a bad thing when it's with, inside of the economy for the sake of business. Okay. Now, coming back to the system again, when this system breaks down, we get deflationary periods in history. Now, I'm going to bring up some different angles. I'm going to actually bring up some charts today, okay, nearer the end. And we're going to discuss, looking at, the period of what we had with inflation and things to do with, the debt to GDP ratio, which is important for today to explain the question of how do we protect ourselves from the coming financial situations that are here and about to get a lot worse. So let's go through the triangle of death and then I'll come back to this. But I just wanted to lay that as a foundation first. So I'm going to put this here now. We have the US Federal Reserve, all right? And then over here we have the US Treasury. And I personally call this the triangle of death. Okay. Now, in 1971, for those of you, okay, I mean, I'm sure you must have heard of something. If you haven't, okay, this is why it's great for you guys to be on, because this is vital, crucial foundational information that you must have to have a perspective. And it is sad to me because I do speak to many people who actually have no idea about any of this gold standard system, you know. And as time is going along, education is always moving further away from this kind of teaching because, or it's not even there at all, because as we know, this kind of information is what brings liberty and freedom. And this is what wealth is all about. The essence of wealth isn't even about money per se, even though money is involved and currency is involved, but it's more to do with freedom. So in 1971, August 15th to be exact, okay, President Nixon made the decision to end the gold convertibility system. Now, what triggered this? Simply, we had a period where, okay, the US, now I did the history for it last time, but what triggered this, and I'll put this underneath here, when he ended the system, what we had going on before that is a couple of things. So we had more wars, okay? More wars. The most common one, we had the Korean War, we had the Vietnam War as well. Vietnam, okay? So all of these different situations of what we had, Vietnam War, all right? And then we had, what we know as the space race, okay? Now with the space race, all right? Okay, welcome Liz, I see you there. Great to have you on. All right. So the space race, which was, Russia versus the US and I guess the rest of the world. All right. China wasn't in this at the time because of their economical structure at the time, which is important. I will discuss China, not now, but as we're going through in these lessons, I will discuss China because it's a necessary thing to discuss. Okay. But we had the space race and the US base, well, I believe Russia got to got the first object into space with the Sputnik, I believe it is, the satellite. But then US beat them to it with getting the first man on the moon, and we get that famous phrase "one step for mankind" and etc. Okay, so all of this equals to, all right, and I'm gonna change this here, spending. Okay, now there's nothing wrong with spending at all. Okay, I want you to remember that spending is not a bad word whatsoever. And it's funny because when you say spending, it sounds bad sometimes, but saving sounds good and spending sounds bad when both of them, there's no correlation sometimes with them in certain, situations. All right. So when we look at what we had in the end of the gold convertibility system, okay, in this end of the gold convertibility system, we saw a very, very big issue happen. And what this meant is that this area here was cut off. All right. Now, currency and money. We discussed this for the last couple of weeks now. And so some of you should know this. Welcome, Matty.
Yeah, sorry I'm a bit late.
I'm good to have you on. Now, I say this. When we look at what we have as a structure of society now, we're in this situation of what we call the petrodollar. Now, the petrodollar, it still has a backing. Okay, there is still a backing there, but it's nowhere near to the level of what gold represents. So, currency, if we put this here, what is currency is the representation of an asset or monetary asset. Okay, this is what currency is. All right, and then money itself, okay, is the store of value. Okay, money is supposed to be a store of value. Now, money and an asset, now we call it a store of value, but the money was a store of the value, or I'll just put the true value, because if I put store of value, it might get a bit complicated as to what's going here. So true value. All right. So if you put it in that sense, okay, let me put that here. So we have money as true value. So when we look at these two paradigms, everything on the right hand side right here was currency. The dollar is a currency. It is the currency of the US, but as the name denotes currency or current, my dad being an electrician, I think in wires sometimes and currents moving. That's just how I think. Currency, a current is supposed to carry the power. You know, what really kills you is, the voltage. the amps. That's what kills you. The flow, or the direction, the speed at which it goes, and etc. That's just the movement, or the what causes things to move. But the actual contents of it, that kills you if you were to get electrocuted. That's the amps. And gold is in the same sense. Gold is really what the value is. That's the what the value of, we're basing it on, and the dollar was to use to represent that. So when this system ended, the dollar wasn't backed, okay, by gold anymore. Okay, it's backed by what we have now, which is the term coming from the Latin fiat, or fiat currency. Okay, so or we have fiat currency now, and so fiat, which is the word for promise. Okay, now currency, I'll put this here, backed by, now excuse my capitalization in the wrong place. So fiat currency, we have this where we have a currency is backed by figures and promises. Okay, so this is exactly where we are right now. We have a currency which is backed by figures and promises. Okay, and we have the dollar, which is backing every other currency. Now, switching back over to the right hand side again for us to get the picture of where we're going today. This is just a prelude to the actual lesson. I just want to lay a good foundation for those of you who haven't heard, and for those of you who have heard already or heard this before and would like to bluster re-solidify that foundation. So when we look at this triangle of death, what is this? Now, the dollar itself, okay, the situation that is in right now. Now we have the petrodollar system, which is where commodities for now, especially oil, okay, there was a deal made where in order for you to buy, commodities like oil and etc., it needs to be bought in US dollars. Now China and Russia are trying to find ways around it to kind of use less dollars, but that is the global agreed rule. Okay. Even though the gold standard or the gold convertibility system ended, the US dollar being the world reserve currency hasn't, and it's still the same. Okay, up till today, 90%, for those of you in the course, up to 90% of all the countries of the world have a currency pair with the dollar. Okay. So when we look at this triangle that we have here, why do I call it the triangle of death? And I called it the US triangle over here instead of the US Treasury. But I guess it is the US triangle anyway. So the US Treasury. So when the government needs more money, okay, all right, we go through the US Treasury, the Federal Reserve prints money. So in the example I had last time, we discussed, let's say, for example, 100 trillion, okay? Let's just say a thousand, or yeah, $100 trillion, okay? So the US government needs $100 trillion, and this usually comes from the decision of politicians, okay? So from their mouths, looking at certain aspects and things of the US economy and different things they need to spend on for, from public sector stuff like health and etc. Different things that, it requires them money, they need to pay their bills. So when they need money, they goes through the US Treasury. The US Treasury then goes over to the US Federal Reserve and does the colluding. The US Federal Reserve then prints this money. Now, please note, out of thin air. Okay. So this money is printed, okay, and then the government then takes this money, okay, and now they're in debt. Okay. So what's created right here is debt is created whenever they print out money. Why? Okay. Because there's no gold back in the system, and I explain in a bit more detail because I gave a light example last time as to why we have this system. Okay. So stick with me for a moment. So we have the US Federal Reserve, they print out the money. Now the debt, okay, to try to, you know, put their debt as a collateral, what they do is that they turn these into government bonds. Okay, so especially from 1971 going along, every country, the dollar included, of course, okay, has government bonds. Okay, so the US dollar is not an isolated incident, but the reason why I'm focusing on here before we build a picture over many weeks is because it is the world reserve currency. And I rather lay this foundation until it's solid, and then we can move on to more advanced things. All right. So the government bonds, okay, are auctioned out. So we have a bond auction. Okay. And this bond auction, the most important part here is that we have a set rate at which, people will be paid back, because this is what it is. The government is basically taking their debt and they're loaning it out to people. Okay. So we call it US Treasury notes, or T notes sometimes for short. So we have a bond auction. Let me not put it. and we have what we call the bond yield. So the bond yield is agreed in the Federal Reserve for whatever reason, and when the bond yield is, let me put this here. For whatever reason, the figure is after complex maths. Okay, we have a bond yield. Okay, which equals to interest to pay back. Okay, to investors, if you want to put it that way. Now, in this system, why is this the system of death? Now, the people who are paying for this or buying these bond auctions buy them in dollar denomination. Okay. And so the money that they, as we talked about last week, and I promise I won't stay on this aspect for too long, probably 4 more minutes, then we can get to the next part. We have the bond auction, people, countries around the world buy in dollars. Okay. So I just put participants buy in dollars. Now, this includes US citizens themselves. Okay. So participants buy in dollars, take these dollars, hand it over to the government. The government takes these dollars, and promises to pay them back the money. Now, the question I posed to you guys last week, all right, which is if there was only $1 that existed in the world from one person and somebody wanted to borrow that dollar and he said, okay, I'm going to borrow this dollar and I want you to pay me $2 back. Because $1 only ever existed, how are they going to get the second dollar to pay you? Okay. Unless they forge it. Okay. And this is, or unless the person who had it the first time has to give you another dollar, then now you borrow $2, now they want four. Okay. And this is exactly in a very simplistic way what the system is here. Whenever the government needs more money, the Federal Reserve prints more money out for them, which creates more debt. Because whenever we have, in other words, the debt is the same thing as us saying quantitative easing. Now, quantitative easing, okay, on different levels have different effects. Okay. I'll put this here. Quantitative easing, if we can call it for short, QE, which is what I like to say because it saves time in speaking. But quantitative easing, okay, which means money printing, okay, is the system we have here. Now, this system is broken completely, as we know, and we're getting into times, especially from what I would say 2020. Now, from 2008, we had a financial crash. And into 2020, we've had another financial crash. Now, the reasons for the financial crashes that happen are vastly different. Okay. Now, who got bailed out, which is what I'm trying to push towards so that we can get this great foundation, or who got bailed out, or who suffered and who didn't, okay, is a completely different picture now. How money was dealt with, how currency was dealt with, was very different from 2008 to 2020, okay, into where we are right now. And so I think it's necessary to address these things, which I will do today. So we know I don't like to call fiat currency money because I think it's disrespectful. Let's just call it what it is, which is just paper notes, currency. All right, currency printing, I should put. So every time currency is printed, we have this situation where there's more money circulating. Now, why is gold such a powerful, asset? There are different reasons for it. I spoke about it from a scientific level. Now, you remember, as I said, my degree is in chemistry, my master's is in pharmaceutical science and medicinal science. So I love science a lot still, even though I'm not involved there. I'm into money science now, if you want to put it that way. However, when we talked about gold, just very quickly, we know that gold as a physical material, okay, is the only asset that doesn't is inert, okay, doesn't erode. Now, silver is still a very, very great asset. However, it does react with sulfur and air. And so over time, it can, over a long, long time, it can, lose its value because of the reaction, because it leaves a little bit of a green tinge on the silver. Whereas with gold is inert to everything. Okay. If you had gold from your family 2,000 years ago, you still have that gold today. And as long as you clean it, it will still shine the same way, still have the same brilliance. Okay. Nothing will change, with that gold. And so these, with gold, it's material intrinsic, probabilities. I keep saying the probability because I'm thinking about what I'm about to say next, but the properties of it, I should say, okay, is fungibility. Okay, you can exchange it, from one to another. It's divisible to a certain degree. It's divisibility, and other aspects of it allow it to be an asset that has long-standing value. Okay, along with silver, which is not too far away. Okay, now with gold, what makes gold gold is because of the scarcity. Now, I don't know who remembers this. Let me put a little question out there. How many, I know we're not trying to do science here, but does anybody remember how many parts per billion there are of gold in the Earth's crust? Somebody? No idea. Thank you for being honest, bro. Name says no idea. All right. So let's go through it one more time. So with the gold that we have in the Earth's crust, what makes money money is scarcity. The key word I want you to keep here is scarcity. If you want to be a rich person, find out what's scarce, find out find out the thing that most people are not looking at, and you'll be rich. This is exactly how riches work and how wealth works. So if you don't learn anything else today, the key here is scarcity. Now, gold is a perfect asset because not only is it very inert, very stable over very, very long periods of time, especially over, several generations, centuries, and even thousand years and more, is the scarcity one of the biggest things here. So for for the next time someone asks you, about gold, you can be, even more confident in your, reasonings as to why gold is a perfect asset to keep as a store of value, which is another term I'll be bringing along. But it's 3 parts per billion. Okay, so 3 parts per billion means that for every 1 billion particles that there are on the Earth's crust, three of those will be a gold particle. Okay, so we're talking very, very minuscule amounts of gold. Okay, which is perfect for there to be scarcity. Okay, for money to be money, it needs to have the aspect of scarcity to it. Okay, that's one of the biggest and most important attributes about money. Okay, now we've ever since we came off the gold standard system. Okay, scarcity definitely wasn't an issue anymore when it comes to currency. Okay, that and reason being, when we look at what we have going along with this system here, if you're not backing your currency by a real asset or true money, and you're backing it by promises, you can do whatever you like. Now, America right now, has the checkbook of the world in a sense, because we're still under the world reserve currency system of, the dollar being the world reserve currency. And anytime it wants money, it can just simply, pull out the unlimited checkbook, if you'd like to call it that, and print out money and pump it back into the world economy, which is bad. Now, why, just to put a little bit of a situation here, how do you protect yourself? So I'm going to get straight to the point. How do you protect yourself from coming currency devaluation? All right. Now, currency devaluation is what I believe is going to happen. We've had different forms as to what crashes take, but I believe that we're coming back to a situation here of currency devaluation. Now, first thing for you to understand how to protect yourself is to understand what goes on here. I promise I will come back to the triangle. So if we go to gold, all right, gold, we call it, okay, a store of value, okay? So like a hedge, okay, in to protect the wealth of your family, yourself, and etc. Now, gold as it intrinsically as itself, because of its properties and how, the scarcity aspect and the fungibility, its divisibility to a certain degree, okay, we can we can use it as something to have a solid, you know, definition of what value is. Now, under the gold standard system, okay, one of the things that's very powerful about gold and protects you is that gold, by law, didn't need, okay, a governmental authority to, number one, mint gold, okay, or have banks in it, or for banking, or let me put it, let me get a bit more space here. Can't wait. If there's a MetaTrader 6, then we can have unlimited lines, or setting up banking in any, so I put accounts, okay. So what we had is that is the government, okay, in those days for gold, all right, and for the UK it will be silver. Now the pound sterling, for those of you who are not too sure, the pound sterling comes from, it means 1 pound equals to 1 pound of sterling. So in the UK we had the sterling, okay, but the same principle applies anyway. So gold didn't need it, didn't need, excuse me, let me take this off. Let me get the N in there because it could mean something different. So gold didn't need a governmental authority to mint gold or for setting up banking, which means that there was a bit of what we would discuss today parallel with cryptocurrency while we're in a good time is a bit of decentralization in a sense. Okay, not completely. All right, I'll say in between, so non-custodial, but in other words, you didn't there wasn't a centralized unit in the sense of, everything went through a small group of people, which is the issue that we're facing today and why, for example, cryptocurrency is such a powerful thing. And I will go through cryptos because that's such a hot topic. Oh, and there's a crypto course, by the way, coming out. So students, and I'll be giving it out to the public. Right now, my mind is just on helping people. So it will be out for free. I'm going to put a cryptocurrency course out. It needs to be finalized because I always want to give good quality. And we're going to go through different things and aspects to how to get ahead. Okay. So tell your friends, your family about this, for example, guys, because I'm going to be doing this for a very long time. Okay. I'll still be teaching, other things, but here, this is, life. This is protecting ourselves for the future, our kids, our family, our grandkids. Okay. You want to be able to look, 50 years, 40 years back and say, you know what, it was worth coming to Mike's session at, on a Thursday night at 9 o'clock and listening to a lot of jargon and a lot of teaching mixed together. Anyway, so gold didn't need a governmental authority to mint or set gold. So, for example, we had two situations here. We had, of course, we had minting banks, okay, which were able and allowed to open up bank accounts. So you had minting banks, okay, and then you had the normal banks as well, okay. All right. So governments really couldn't get involved as they would like to over the money supply. Now, why is gold a protection? Now, how did gold protect the people in the past? Now, I gave you the example when we talked about gold versus, that term I used, deficit and surplus. Okay. Now, so if I put this here, we have gold, and I'm going to put deficit. And then on this side, we're going to have surplus. Okay. Surplus. All right. So in an economy, as we were discussing about spending, saving, different things like that, okay, when you do commerce, it will give you a surplus in either gold in those days or in currency. Okay, and whichever one you have, okay, whatever you do next, or gold would be like the standard to bring back the equilibrium, okay, between gold and currency. What you want it in a perfect currency is that there should be exactly, the amount of currency in circulation should represent exactly how much gold you have in reserve. Now, because of the nature of gold, it's heavy. It's not, even though you can move it around, it's not that portable, you know, and for everyday use is, not very feasible as a situation to be moving around. Okay, you can have a currency to represent that gold, but everybody know and everybody knew if you went back in the, back in the days, you couldn't take a piece of paper and tell someone that this is actually money, this is value, I'm rich if you have a lot of paper. They're just, well, I mean, in a sense, yeah, but for them, the real value will be the thing itself, the real hard, shiny piece of gold. That would be, the real value where it is. Okay. What you're showing them to them is just paper notes, in a sense. So gold didn't need governmental authority for to mint or to set up banking. We had minting banks and we had normal banks. And so the government couldn't get involved in the system of gold in the same way it has now after 1971. Okay. And we did talk about it in 1974, that declassified documentation about creating a paper gold market to basically push or drive, gold demand, or people demanding to buy gold into a paper market where people think they have gold but they don't own it. For example, the ETFs market and stuff like that. So similar to what we have parallel today with a bit of decentralization, gold acts like a hedge to protect the people, because with gold, okay, in the gold standard system, governments, okay, so those naughty, you know governmental political people who want to basically, you know are greedy and don't care about the country, only about, how they look and etc., okay, couldn't do the things that they wanted to do, you know so if I was to put this here, the government could only spend what it taxed. Okay. Now, I'm not talking about taxes today, that's another day, but in short, what gold resists or what gold did was act like a hedge or a protection, a barrier. So the government, no matter how greedy they are, okay, it protected the people from the government, okay, in the sense that they could only spend, all right, government, they could only spend what is they've taxed or what is being taxed. So whatever the tax rate is, that's what the government has, because intrinsically as a government, what are they designed to do? They're designed to for the interests of the people. They're designed to make sure that the inhabitants of their land, of their country, or in, for example, if it was the EU, their union, is to ensure that every party, every country, okay, has good fiscal has great fiscal policy which helps for the expansion of that country's interests. Okay. Now we did take a look about fiscal policy versus central bank policy, and I'll probably touch on it in a moment. But just stick with me for a moment. Okay. And if there are questions, please post them. Okay. I will answer them at the end. I won't dish out all of the information without allowing for questions. But when we want to think about how to protect ourselves from the current currency devaluation, okay, which is imminent, okay, is for us to understand, what was the standard before, what was the standard that kept an equilibrium, which is the gold standard. So gold prerequisite is a store of value, okay, because of the nature of how it is. Now, because gold, wasn't something centralized and couldn't be monopolized, and we had minting banks and different things. So different minting banks, in other words, they could issue their own notes, okay, but they were still redeemable for the same amount of gold as maybe banknotes. So you could have Federal Reserve notes in your pockets, for example, US dollars, or you could have the Bank of Michael dollars in your pocket, and they will equal the same thing, okay, in ratio to the gold amount, which is very powerful. And it's only now we've had something to the same degree, which it comes to in the same way as cryptocurrency, where, for example, Bitcoin, very, very, a lot of times is parallel to gold. And some people even think it's better than gold in the sense that, it's more heavily divisible because it's mathematical. You can have 0.0067852, Bitcoin, but you can't have that with gold. Okay. So there are some of those paradigms, not the same, but history, as you can see here, is rhyming. So the government could only spend what is taxed. Now, once this system was broken, now the whole reason why this system was broken, okay, is because many of the other countries, seeing what was going on in America, started to speculate that the U.S. government is spending more dollars than they have gold to account for. Okay, and so in other words, these countries, you have to remember, were doing exchanges in dollars. Now they could redeem it for gold, but because the system was quite stable for a while, they thought there's no need. We'll just store the dollars and we can use that as our representation of our purchasing power. Okay, but they didn't opt in for the conversion. Now we know that France headed this off first, where they noticed this and they started to request, their their gold instead in exchange for dollars. Okay, because they could see that something's not right. The US is spending seemingly out of control. We've just come out of a war. We've come out of this deflationary period where interest rates are low. Now, when interest rates are low, for those of you who don't know, it means that things like loans become cheaper. Okay, because central banks are the central infrastructure which sets the banking infrastructure for a country. Okay, so if the interest rates are a certain percentage, then banks have to lend at that percentage plus their own on top competitively for the business. Okay, so in this deflationary period that we're in, things are starting to pick up, and then after we have a whole load of wars, and then we have the space race, which equals to massive spending. These guys, this, as President Nixon called them, the speculators, decided that no, I think they're spending more money than they have the gold to account for, which they were right about. And so they started to request their gold, and so the America was bleeding out of gold to a very high degree, and this means that the dollar was becoming more and more devalued, very, very quickly. And so to stop that, instead of President Nixon doing the right thing, which was to curb government spending to make sure that there's an equilibrium between the gold and the dollar, they decided to just get rid of this system altogether and call it a temporal change, which has lasted for 50 years now. 50 years in August anyway, so 49 years and a bit. Okay, and so this is where we are now. At that moment, the people already had, I would say, semi-protection in this system, but now there was no protection. Okay, and so the government can strengthen and weaken, money as it is. So now, for those of you trading, for example, we have the NFPs tomorrow, the non-farm payrolls and different things like that give us economical insight into things that could potentially happen here. Now, we'll be looking at balance sheets and stuff like that, as I said, in the future, but for now, have that in your mind. So in this system we have here, in this is in the 40s, we have a very, well, I would say no before the 40s, but we have this kind of parallel to where we are now. And so what America was doing here, okay, is that they were heavily, okay, in a deficit, okay, in the sense that in a deficit, when we talk about trade balances, is part of the economics foundation, which is, okay, they were spending more than they were earning, okay. Now, why gold is a special tool is because it keeps that equilibrium, in the sense that in the normal system where the gold standard system is the standard, okay, for living, or standard of economy, if your country is not producing anything, gold will cause you to have to produce something and start to think because your currency is going to start to get, um, badly devalued. Things are going to get more difficult, okay, and it's going to cause you to have to produce something. Gold always produces people to become, people who create value, okay, because if you have a deficit, you're spending more than you're earning, then you're going to have to start to think of ways, start boosting your economy in a way to start getting business to come into you, so that that equilibrium can shift, and the amount of gold equals the amount of currency. Now, when you're in a deficit, the amount of gold in your country is going to continue to be depleted until you bridge that equilibrium, okay. And the same when you're in a surplus. With surplus, it's a bit different. If you have more gold than currency, all right, then your currency becomes too strong. Okay, when that happens, then in terms of competitiveness for exporting, for example, if you're a country that exports a lot, like for example, Caribbean countries, in Africa, for example, who, you know, they make most of their money from, their GDP, is mainly based on the exports that they do, then they're gonna have a stronger currency, and that's what the system should be. And if their currency is stronger, so stronger currency, then you know competition comes in. Okay, so gold has this amazing way to bridge two gaps. And on top of that, we have this system here where it protects the person, where people don't have to rely on the government for everything when it comes to monetary, a monetary system, that they can take things into their own hands with things like minting banks, where they could open an account that's backed by gold, or, has a gold standard system on it, which is amazing. Okay. The only thing we have to that, as I said now, is a cryptocurrency system, which in next week we'll discuss. But you see, this deficit and this surplus, okay, is an important picture as to how gold is a very, very good tool to protect and give a very healthy economy. Okay. Now, gold isn't got it has its own issues, hardly any, but it is, out of all of the systems, the most stable and the most integrous, which is the key there. We have the most integral system. So when we're in this deficit and you're spending, 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 but then there isn't an equilibrium to match you, you're not producing, which is what was happening here. The US was just basically spending, but they weren't bringing in, the GDP. Okay, the GDP wasn't growing. You come into this issue here. Now, if you're a country that's, surplus, we talked about the Japanese, and I always talk about, for example, Japan as a country. Okay, the economics of their country is very interesting. Okay, in the terms of how the price moves on the market based on their central bank policy, they're a very defensive currency. Okay. And Japan actually has the highest debt to GDP ratio. I might talk about that today, or I might save that for next week. But with Japan, for example, all right, and I talked about this before. If I put here Japan, what's the structure of Japan? Okay, at least 70% or more of the GDP comes from exports. Okay, so it's an exporting country. And because it comes from exports, all right, one of the key things about an exporting country, like you can see with China, is, making sure that their currency, the key is to keep your currency value low, okay, which is conducive for business, because if you have the cheapest price, okay, people want to buy from you. So in other words, in a sense, you're still boosting your economy, but, by keeping your prices low. In the gold standard system, you can't actually purposely do this. If you're exporting a lot, then your currency is going to increase in strength until you deplete it. So you have this healthy balance that gold keeps. So how do you protect yourself from currency devaluation? Now, gold acts as a hedge, as a store of value from currencies changing in value drastically. Because if you think about it, all right, every time they print money, which is in their hands and in the hands of governments, okay, it's in the hands of what we call, as I said, fiscal policy. Fiscal policy. Now, whenever there's a financial crash, okay, we know that fiscal policy now, from what we introduced last week, and central bank policy kind of come to one. They become one thing. Okay. Why is that? All right. Now, when the public doesn't have enough money to buy all of the government bonds, there's an issue. We have a supply and demand issue. Okay, there's more supply than demand, and that's bad. Okay, so what do central banks do is that they step in and do what we will call asset purchasing. Okay, so they'll do asset purchasing, and they'll do this to create an equilibrium to lock the bond yield percentage at a certain price. Okay, so asset purchasing. So when this asset purchasing happens, they buy the rest of these bonds or buy the rest of the debt just to lock in the interest rate at a certain price, or the bond yield. Okay. And with fiscal policy, we have this other side where we have this stimulus. All right. And this will help us to see where we are to protect ourselves for these next 9 years coming along. So on one side, we have the asset purchasing. Okay. They purchase all the assets. Okay. Purchase the assets, or they call it assets anyway, these government bonds to protect this bond yield. Okay. And then and also to manage it against inflation. All right. Now, in the current situation that we have, usually stuff like inflation, which is the cost of money. And if you think about this, guys, if the bond yield, I'm going to give an example here. If your bond yield equals to 2.7%, okay. Now, governments always say they like inflation to be at 2%. That's their so-called benchmark, good benchmark. So I'll say, let's say the bond yield is 1.1%, easy, okay? Not $1, 1%. There we go. If your bond yield is 1%, all right, and then your interest rate is 2%, or the current interest rate, or the the interest rate on money, all right, you're losing 1% buying power. So the difference between here, your bond yield, and here would be how much buying power you gain or lose. Okay, so because we have 1% minus 2%, in other words, if this is a 10-year bond, which is the common one, over 10 years, okay, if the interest rates, and that's given, okay, that the interest rate stays the same. So if we say over 10 years, and this goes for savings accounts too. So if I'm talking about this, let's talk about savings accounts. Same thing, fixed rate ISAs. I worked in the bank for 4.5 years. So I saw all the different financial models you can think of. All right. I think I thank God for that time, because I did see this system a lot better, and why people are not winning. So 10-year bond yield, okay. If the 10-year bond yield is a 1% return, so they're promising to pay these guys 10% back. Now, in terms of nominal loss, which means the government doesn't give them any money back, because the bond has defaulted, okay, which is highly unlikely to happen, is cool. So when we talk about nominal, yield, or nominal giving something back in nominally, we'll talk about the physical money. So if someone puts in $1,000, dollars, in a government bond which is AAA rated, okay, UK2 is also AAA. So most of the EU country, well, most of the stronger countries of the world have AAA bonds, which means very highly unlikely to default, or in other words, highly unlikely for you not to get your nominal money back whatsoever. Okay, at least if you think of it as a return on investment, is basically saying, for example, the worst that can happen is you get your money back, which is good. All right, at least you get your money back, and then the better is to actually gain some interest. Okay, so 10-year bond yields, okay, you're losing on average every year a cumulative, clear this, cumulative, all right, loss of purchasing power. All right. So when this asset purchase happens, okay, it's to basically cover the government's back from the mess that they've already made, that they're making worse every time they get the chance to. All right. So this cumulative loss of purchasing power is what we have with fiat currency right now. Right now, and I always advise, and I'll say this to all of you, go and check out, if you haven't already, check out the US inflation calculator. It starts from 1913, when the Federal Reserve actually was born, okay, and printing actually started, okay, or the use of aggressive printing. Well, not really, but from 1913 printing started, and the Federal Reserve was born then. So you can go and check on that phone. If you want to check on your phone now, you can, and you can actually see how much, if you were to buy something for $1 in 1913, how much it would cost in 2013, and you can see how much money has been devalued by. Now, recent figures, roughly, I think for every right now, $1 back then is equal to 9 cents right now, something like that. So 900%, decrease in its, in its, or more than, I think is 9,000, I believe. Yeah, in its ability to be used for purchasing power. So when we look at the bond yields, looking at the interest rates, we can see we have a cumulative purchasing power loss. And so what is deceiving many people, and I would love you guys to share with your families and friends, is that a savings account doesn't necessarily mean that you're gaining money if you leave your money inside of the bank. Now, when I was working in the banking time, I found out that for every 1% that, you know, what they would say, the less informed public, which is everybody, puts their money into savings in a bank, that 1% that they get back, so if they get 1% back, for example, bond yield, savings account, same thing, they make 2,200% on 1% using leverage. And the leverage is what usually crashes the economy and it affects the public sector. Okay. Which, and I will talk about leverage. I promised I would, and I will talk about it. Then we can talk about fractional lending and fractional reserve banking too. But 10-year bond yield, you have a cumulative power loss of power. So this cumulative loss of power, when we talk about bond yields and interest rates, is not the same when it comes to gold. You can't have this system. Governments can't create a system of basically what I call a Ponzi scheme, because the first money that they're promising to pay back to these people, they need to borrow more in order to pay them back. So they're going to have to keep on borrowing more and more and more money, and more and more and more money, and keep printing and printing more money, which keeps devaluing the currency. So you have this cycle of death until we have the day when the dollar, for example, nobody comes to bond auction because everybody's lost confidence in the government's ability to pay back the money. Now, knowing the government's ability of whether they can, pay back their money is what we call the debt to GDP ratio. Now, the debt to GDP ratio, I'll be discussing it, as I said, in more detail, but keep that in mind. All right. So for now, we don't have that, but we're pushing towards that very quickly. Why is that? Okay. So with this, now we can see that gold is a hedge. It protects us, from this kind of system. Okay. Because the government can't just print money. If there's no gold for it, they can't print it. Okay. And therefore, these figures, okay, will be in our favor. It will be the other way around. Right now, most of the time, bond yields and interest rates, okay, usually the government sets in or governments of the world set in a way where the bond yield is always lower than the interest rate. Okay. And so even though normally you might see value increase of 1% on whatever you put in, but you're actually losing purchasing power, which is what really drives an economy. Okay. It's not how many notes you have, it's what the notes can do. Okay. And so we have this system right here where we have this balance between, trying to, you know, print more money and help the economy, and then making sure we don't, go into debt. And this is basically what politics is all about. All of those guys in the suits and women in, suits, that's all they do. Okay. And so right now in 2020, we're in a stage where fiscal policy and central bank policy is merging together. We have the asset purchasing, we have stimulus merging together. For example, if we can talk about this in the UK, me and Alexandra were discussing this. When you think about what happened during the coronavirus, what did we see? All of a sudden the UK pulled out money out of nowhere and was giving out. We have the furlough scheme, which is still ongoing right now. Okay, and this is why the pound trade that's about to happen, guys. The analysis for it, we've been looking at it. The price is getting very close to where we're supposed to be for the massive sell. And then we also see in America where we have this, they call it the stimmy on Twitter, but the stimulus check that everybody gets. Okay, all of that is comes from, quantitative easing, printing. Okay, all of these different things that are taking place, which is continuing to devalue the currency. Okay, now in the real system, when the gold standard system, that wouldn't be possible. Okay, completely. All right, to the same degree as to what we have now, where it's out of control. And so from 1971, we have an out of control printing system where whenever money needs to be printed, you just press a couple of buttons and there's 100 billion dollars more in the economy or in other countries too. Okay. So how do you protect yourself from currency devaluation? Coming back to this. Now gold, this is not a financial advice for legal reasons I'm saying on the video, but gold, okay, as a store of value, okay, you're allowed to exchange, well, at the moment anyway, you're allowed to exchange your currency for an asset, which is beautiful. Okay, now gold itself intrinsically doesn't have that many industry uses. We use it for, different in science anyway, we use it for different tests to test for the presence of different elements and whatnot. But really and truly, we don't have that many use cases for gold. Okay. And this is why, I was talking about Warren Buffett, I think last week or the week before. Now I'm going to put more space here. Warren Buffett has sold all of his banking and airplane stocks, and he's gone to go and buy gold stocks like Barrick Gold and stuff like that, which is a big sign to let if he's doing that. Not that we follow him, but you should be very afraid because when it comes to equity investing, he's the biggest. So anyway, but in this system that we have of gold, one of the best ways you can protect yourself is to hedge your wealth around having assets, okay, like gold and like silver, okay. Now, why is that? You would say, well, if the currency was to crash, wouldn't gold devalue? Yes, it would. Okay, but because of the scarcity of gold, okay, and then the demand that goes with it, okay, the demand. Let's say if the dollar was to devalue by 70%, okay, it wouldn't equal. So if I put dollar 70% devaluation, it wouldn't equal to, and I'm going to put this to say not equal to 70% devaluation on gold. Okay. Why? Because they have different um, amounts of them physically being there. Gold is a lot less. We have 3 parts per billion, whereas with a system of fiat currency, is actually unlimited. As I say, as many trees as there are in the world, that's how much money we have. Okay, until they cut down all the trees that are available, then we'll run out of physical money. Then there can potentially theoretically be a limit if you want to think that far. But in essence, we don't have the limit to what the currency is. So we don't have a limit to what is value. With gold, gold was here before we were born, and if that it will be here after we die. So with gold, there's a specific amount that will always be and will ever be, which is, for example, why Bitcoin is so powerful, because Bitcoin, there's only ever going to be 21 million. Okay. And if you think about when Bitcoin, for example, was made, I'm just discussing, having conversation with you guys. Think about it. It was made in 2008 after the last financial crash. Okay. Before this one. Okay. Where people, Bitcoin was created in a way to be a intrinsically deflationary asset. So over time, Bitcoin becomes more and more valuable instead of less and less valuable because there'll only be a certain amount. And once it hits 21 million, in order for you to interact with that system of money, you need to put money into the system to purchase, which means you'll only ever gain in value and never decrease. Whereas, same with gold, whereas with currency or paper money, is not the same. Okay, the government could change the rules today, and fiscal policy and central bank policy come together. For example, if the government needs to make a stimulus, which is what it's doing in almost every country due to coronavirus, the central banks will work together with them and print as much money as they need to kind of fill that stimulus. Okay, and then they will change the interest rates and make it low to get people to spend that money to kind of boost the economy. So they short term, short circuit the problem short term, but long term, they've just devalued the currency even further. And the next government is going to have to pick up the pieces as to what to do next. Okay. So for me personally, I believe that the only solution, and I believe it will happen, is that we are going to go back to the gold standard system in this case. Okay. And we're going to get to a place where the governments are going to have to give up and fight, give up the fight against gold, which is what's happening right now. For example, where if I go right here, look at the gold trade I'm in. So this gold trade that we have right here, I'm going to go back to the teaching, but for those of you who remember the call, now this is a very small position, okay, on a smaller account. But when we look at gold from here, all right, I gave you guys the trading call. We had the weekly validation point, the institutional level right here. And when we had that, we had the initial sell that took place here, all right. And this was a stop punt, and it gave us a massive sell. Now, this massive sell you see here, okay, I called this trade beforehand, but this massive sell you see here, all right, is from is a massive, of course, is a gold short because the price is pushing very strongly down. But what they announced, which, gives this massive, strong short or strong sell, is the fact that the coronavirus vaccine was announced literally at, I think, 11:45, 11:15. Okay, after the price got to this specific level, institutional level, not too long after, they announced all of a sudden that they have a coronavirus vaccine. Okay, and this pushed the price crazily short. Okay, for a very long time. And so when the price got back to this order block here, this is the trade call that I gave because from seeing this, I can see the manipulative hand of the gold devaluation. Now, I'm going to stay on here for another 10 minutes. I know this is longer than an hour, but I decided to make these slightly longer than an hour just to make sure that I can feed you guys with information, get some questions, and then we can go from here. So protecting ourselves, for the meantime, why is gold selling off like this and going to continue? I'm using this sell, by the way, as an experiment. Okay, so for students, if you close your trades, well done if you took the profit. But for me, I'm just holding on to this for the sake of, um, just using it to explain and teach more on different things, technically speaking. Okay, but at the moment, during the wake of this crisis, we've all of a sudden come back to the same place and we've had a sell. Okay, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I know, okay, how governments are very deathly afraid of gold, because gold is kind of like a mirror in the face of the world governments of, if you want to put it, the sins that they're committing of money, of taking advantage of people, you know messing up the economy, inflating it with leverage, allowing the banking sector, private sector to have crazy liberties, and then when everything crashes, they come back and try to basically offset the risk and the mess to us, for us to pick up the pieces. Okay, and in the absence of gold, that's what happens. Okay, in any system. So if I put this here, I'm gonna put gold. Okay, 1974. So gold 1974, what happened? Okay, and you can go and search this up. All right, we have a declassified document. I want to put the facts here so that you can put some notes down. So we have a declassified document. Okay, talking about the beginning of a paper market, paper gold market. Now, paper gold just means gold that you don't own but you trade. So that can be anything from, let me put that there. So, all right, put that. Yeah. So, gold ETFs. All right. So, gold ETFs are kind of like, a tracker for gold, and you can trade them and you can actually redeem the certificates for gold, but nobody does. They just keep trading their papers. Okay. So, this gold paper market, it has one design. All right. To explain this sell a bit better before I go into what I'm doing. Now, if there are any questions, please feel free. Is everybody enjoying this so far? Type yes. I hope you are. Be honest if you're not too sure. It's so. You guys enjoying it? Type yes if you are, or no, or okay.
No, this is good, man. Cool.
Thanks,
Really good.
Mike. Fantastic. Thank you, bro. Thank you, Alex. Let me hear from guys. Any questions so far? Because if you leave me to go, all good. All right. Thanks, man. Is deflation the same at all? I love your questions, Liz. Always. Is deflation the same as devaluation? All right. That's a good question. All right. I'm going to end off on here and I can probably, that's a good question. Getting it slowly but surely. No problem. This will be up, guys. As I said, if you leave me and I continue talking, I can talk for 2 hours. You know that, right? So you should stop me and ask me questions. Just type them. I'll see it and we go from there. Okay. This is a conversation for me to family. Now, I'm not, it sounds like a teaching because I'm just laying the foundation, but really, I'm sharing from my heart the things and necessary knowledge you need in order to kind of set this system up for yourselves to protect your families. Now, gold is not the only asset. It's just this is the foundational asset to lead us into the others. So if we look at what we have here, basically what the document was saying was the aim of this was to drive, okay, the demand for physical gold away from the gold, um, I would say the gold asset market, in the sense that the physical holding of gold. Okay, so in 1974, the declassified document that was sent in 1974 was revealed that the whole reason for a gold paper market is because governments were deathly afraid of the mess that's been made. Okay, and to cover up their tracks, instead of trying to push, gold away completely, because they know they can't lie to people, because gold has been in society for way too long. Okay, for people to be deceived into the fact that, oh, yeah, let's not think about gold anymore. Now, you have to understand what happened is that in 1971, President Nixon took some drastic measures. And I believe for about 3 years during that time, gold was illegal to own. If you had gold, the government by right, okay, could take your gold. So what was happening, just to put this here, 1971, and some other times in history during this 20th century, okay, gold was illegal to own. Okay. Now, this is what I mean about government policy, where they try to, bully the people. Yeah, crazy, bro. Exactly. It was crazy. It was illegal to own. It was actually illegal to own. They did this in the time of war. You know, um, Winston Churchill has a famous way that he did it. In 1933, okay, for those of you who like history, in 1933, he requested that every single person that buys or sells or owns gold must be registered. Okay, and then the next year after, he made a law that anybody that's bought unregistered gold needs to hand it back to the government of the UK with immediate effect. Okay, and they took that gold to fight the war, and I understood, but it's just the way that it happened, that manipulative system. Okay, why we need to be, very ready to be protected is because of this reason. So gold ETFs and the gold, was created in this way. Smart. Yeah, he's a smart fella. Yeah. So in 1971, gold was illegal to own, and they did this. Fort Knox. The gold was moved to the Federal Reserve underground, and this was done to drive the, gold asset, gold the market, or the desire for gold assets, and kind of appease that desire by creating these ETFs and stuff, which is basically saying you do have gold, but it's in paperized form, is in tokenized form, so you don't have to hold gold. You can just trade it and make more gold and more money and etc. And now we have a whole group of schools that teach that these are real, this is true, these are true assets that you can hold on to, when it's not true. Okay, there's a survey right now, and many of I like to listen to asset guys, and one of the things that has come out recently is that it's very clear that for whatever amount of gold there actually is, in the US Treasury, at least there's about 5 to 6 hands, at least. So each ounce of gold has about 5 to 6 claims, mainly because of this, the ETFs market and this divisive use of paper gold markets instead of physical gold. So the gold market at the moment roughly is around about 9 trillion. Okay, and I put this here: 6 trillion is paper gold, probably even a bit more now, and then the other 3 trillion, okay, is physical gold. Okay, so a very small market still compared to the paper gold is about twice as large. Okay. And so this way they've driven the demand away from physical gold, and people have been appeased with, you know, this physical paper gold kind of situation. Now, from this, it doesn't mean go out and buy gold. Okay. It just means that, gold as a hedge is a protector of wealth. It's not designed for it to really, you know, it's not for you to, I mean, yes, you can use gold to, do certain, industrial things, but rather silver is a better candidate. As I said, silver, even though it isn't reactive to most things, it still has a bit of reactivity because of gold's inertness. It has very specific purposes when it comes to things like, magnetics and circuitry and things like that, because they need it to be inert in order for it to work. Okay, but at the same time, with silver, which is something me and Alexandra have been discussing, is one of the things of the future. A lot cheaper than gold, and I think I'd say a lot more profit potential than gold. But still, gold is a hedge. Okay, and we're protecting ourselves in this sense that, you know if you think of it back to this picture here, if the dollar was devaluing by 70%, gold wouldn't devalue by 10%. Maybe it would devalue by 10%. So in not saying that, or it could devalue by 2% or 3%, who knows? Or it could gain at the same time whilst the dollar is losing. Okay. It depends. Okay. And those depend on different factors for another lesson. But what you want to get here as a concept, that you want to start to think about preserving wealth. Okay. What assets do I create? Now, yesterday I ended the lesson talking about assets. All right. And if you have to leave, I understand. Okay. But we talked about assets, and we know that in definition, an asset is something that produces the currency of the day. So if you have a piece of land, you have some gold, you have some silver, you have things that bring money into your own personal financial system. That's what an asset is. Okay, the asset itself doesn't have a denomination. Okay, but it brings in denominations, and that's what we need to be looking for. Okay, these are the things when it comes to cryptocurrency and different assets like that, which no matter what inflation is of the day. So if the dollar devalues by 70%, and for every $1 you have, it equals to, let's say, I don't know, $7, it wouldn't matter, because if you have an asset that represents that value in a sense, or there is a fungibility in exchange between one to the other, you're safe. Okay. So instead of, some families, through inflation, and you can see in different parts of history, Romania, uh, you know, Germany, where they started to use the German DAX, or the Deutschmarks, to use it to burn for fire to keep them warm from the poverty of not being able to buy gas or coal. That's how valueless it became. But the people who had gold, you know, a woman, a German woman I was listening to said that she was born in the time in a small village. Then she discussed it that the people who own gold and silver live life just fine as if nothing happens. Okay, because what they can do is now turn in that gold in times when things get bad, convert that into the money of the day, and they still kind of preserve their wealth no matter what it is. So that's why we call gold a store of value. Now, as I said, there are other ways to get into gold. You can get into gold stocks. Okay, and I will talk about it. Now we have the asset watch. Now, for those of you who haven't seen, the newsletter will be out. The first issue of the newsletter will be out. I'll probably guys show you a little touch of what the newsletter looks like, okay, in a moment. But let's just finish off here. So this is where we are at the moment with gold, where we have this system where they're driving the demand away from gold, and we have pending currency devaluation. Now, how do we know we have pending devaluation? Now I'm using Ripple chart just to get some space. All right, and I'll take some questions. So if you have questions, please go there. I'll probably stay around for about 10 more minutes and then we'll call it a session and we'll continue this theme next week. So I'll continue. How do you protect yourself from currency devaluation? So we've got number one here is, of course, we need to have assets as a standard for money generation. Okay, that's your first thing. So assets as a standard for money generation in the sense that you need now different asset classes or different, they call it asset classes in the sense of the broad spectrum of stocks and whatnot. But when we talk about assets to preserve value, first thing is that you need to have, assets as a standard for money generation. So they should be producing you money. Now, when you start off, I always say the worst exchange in the world right now, okay, is there's two. The worst exchange is selling an asset for money when there isn't a crash. That's number one. And the other worst exchange is, exchanging currency for another currency. Okay. It's exchanging debt for another piece of debt. That's how I see it in my mind. Okay. So number two, all right, I would say is owning. I'm going to say it as it is, owning gold. Okay. Now the question, people say, oh, why would you want to own gold? Because gold doesn't produce you any interest. It doesn't have a return on investment. The ROI is zero. But gold isn't designed to produce an ROI. Okay, it's supposed to protect your ROI that you get from other things. Okay, I'll say that again. So gold, okay, I'll put it here, not created to give you an ROI, but to protect it. All right. So it doesn't mean you have to turn your whole portfolio into gold. All right. All it means is that when it comes to gold, okay, or looking at, having gold is to protect, what you already have or the profits you already have. Okay. And whenever you have a situation where there's a currency devaluation, there are a few things that happen. So what are the signs that we have? Is not just, okay, mass unemployment, but I'm going to put here. So we have mass unemployment. Okay. Now, so as I was saying, some people said that the financial crash of 2008 is the same as this one in 2020, and not so completely. All right. Whenever there's a financial crash, of course, prices of assets become cheap, across the board. All right. But what we have here, which we don't have now, I would say that the situation we're in is very similar to what we had in the 40s, because in the 40s, we've just come out of a situation of already a prolonged, we had a deflationary period, but then we also had a situation where things like commodities were not in high demand. Okay. So I'm going to put this low demand for commodities. All right. Now, why am I saying this? Now, think about 2020, guys, for a moment. Okay. Parallel into the 1940s. What did we have? Because nobody's flying anywhere, we don't need that much oil. Okay. And because nobody's really doing much stuff, I mean, of course, we still need, gas and electric, but, the levels of demand in 2020 became massively reduced. Okay. Now, you saw this. For those of you who are with me during the oil time, we made serious money on oil, long and short, because I didn't talk about it from the aspect per se much then, but we took advantage of, what was going on at the time. Okay, but oil, as we saw, went to minus $38, which means that the oil producers, if you touch convert that, were giving their oil out and paying the people who, because they had such a supply of oil, they were paying people to take the oil from them at $38, which is the first time in history. Okay, now the reason it is actually the first time we've never had a negative, dollar, negative dollar amount for oil, and that gives you a high sign as to something else which is going on. All right, and I'll talk about that more next week, but these are the signs we should be looking for. Now, what's different from 2000 and I would say from 2008 and 1940s is we have a broad printing of money. Now, we've been talking about printing of money, okay, but this time it's fed to the public, okay. Now, what happened in 2008? Just to make it help you to see what I was talking about, because I said in the beginning that some people were saved, some people were left behind. So in 2008, okay, when we had the financial crash, which was from the subprime mortgages, which affected the world, yes, it was a crash. Yes, we had low interest rates. Same thing we have now, very, very low interest rates. But one thing we didn't see is that we had increase, okay, and I love Liz's questions all the time, and I will come to your question, Liz. She said something. Are we going to talk about fractional reserve banking, which we are? We are. Now, what because of this term called leverage, okay, which means that the ability to use a small amount of money to attract higher buying power, which is how we all trade our accounts, okay. In this period we had in 2008, we had an increased printing of money, okay, but the increased printing of money was it was for it was to a certain sector, okay, to bail out banks. Okay, it wasn't for the public. Okay, there wasn't an increased amount of money given out to the public in the same manner that it is now. We didn't have stimulus checks in 2000. If you think about it from a, you know, real life sense, in this, if you take it our head out of the financial part, if you look around 2008, there weren't stimulus checks going around to help people, during that financial crash. If you couldn't pay for your house, there was foreclosures, and so many people who were smart made a lot of money by buying up the assets in the form of these foreclosed houses. Okay, so in the same sense, now we have this increased printing of money. So 2008 and 2020, they rhyme in how they behave, but they're not exactly the same. Okay. And so in this situation here, all right, what did we produce from printing all this money to bail out banks? We had increased banking reserves. Okay. So banking reserves is the amount of money they have, okay, in their reserves. Okay. But the public will not, I'm going to put this here, public sector, which is everybody else, was not saved in the same way, in the same ways. Now there was stimulus in the sense that there was, you could get cheaper loans and stuff like that with QE. Okay. So when we parallel it, I put 2020 here. Why do I think there's going to be a currency devaluation? Okay. Because it's important to, validate what I'm talking about. And then we can go through why, how to protect yourself even more, part 2 next week. But if we look at the parallels here, increased printing of money to bail out the public sector or private sector, central banks, the Federal Reserve stepped in to help, protect these banks, okay, the big ones. Now the Lehman Brothers, different issue. There was no saving them, but for a lot of big companies and stuff on Wall Street and stuff like that were saved from governments, from central bank printing, okay. But the public wasn't in the same way. There wasn't a mass amount of printing going on like we have now, where we have stimulus checks in almost every country. We have stimuluses of businesses. So we have a high, deleveraging of, the issue that's going on right now, with money printing, but just in different ways. Okay. Now, whenever there's increased money printing given to the public, what does that equal to? Inflation. Okay. Which equals to money devaluation. Okay, or I wouldn't want to put money, as I said, no disrespect. Currency, the paper is just currency. Keep it as currency. Devaluation. Sorry. So with this inflation comes with currency devaluation, which is not what we had here. The public sector was saved, but the public sector wasn't saved, but the private was. 2020, the public sector and the private sector were both saved. Okay. So we have a mass amount of printing taking place right now. Interest rates again are still very, very low. Okay, and then we have something else here. Now, what happened in 1940, in the 1940s? Now, I love to read, so I'm not going to go through all of the historical figures, but in the 1940s, which is the beginning of Bretton, the Bretton Woods, or just put Bretton Woods here, all right? During this time, all right, we had, you know, low interest rates, okay, due to the fact of the what we had, all right, all right. Higher unemployment. I don't want to say just higher unemployment than the usual figures or the bench line unemployment of the or the government at the time. All right, and this is where we saw. This is the first time really we saw printing money printing. The Federal Reserve had been open for 27 years at this time. Okay, money printing. I'm gonna put QE for the public. Okay, so the QE for the public, that's where we start to see the higher interest rates take place, okay? And so we have this similar rhyming scenarios when 2008 and then 1940 are kind of merged together into 2020 to kind of like an all-out, you know, you know, devaluation or pending devaluation of the currency. The only thing that's holding up currencies right now is the fiat, the speech or the figures and the skewed results and the different policies that are put into place to rigorously protect the currency. But there's only so long you can do that before a currency starts to devalue. Okay. And so when you're leveraging something, or in other words, using something to protect yourself, it's gone through several layers. Okay. And I think I'll answer your question on this, and then after we'll call it a night. So if I go through the levels of layers we have, so for example, in the 1990s, okay, if you read, you can read about this. Okay, we had a scenario where a lot. Now, for some of you, I mean, I don't know if you have anybody that was born at that time that might help you, to be able to see this a bit better. But in the 1990s, we had, situations with equities, okay, and hedge funds and stuff like that, and they got bailed out. Okay, so when they got bailed out, okay, what we had was, okay, they got leveraged out. Okay, so leveraged out. Okay, now the leverage or the whenever it's always important to remember when a crash happens. Okay, printing money doesn't solve the problem; it just averts the problem or appeases it for a while. Okay, and it just continues to go into higher levels of what we have. So now we had equities, okay, in the early, in the I would say around these times of the 90s, especially later 90s, you had that. Okay, then you had these 2010s, the banking sector was leveraged as well. Now, when you get to these kind of levels where you keep leveraging and leveraging, the last layer, which is where we are right now, is the sovereign layer, which is the money. Okay. And you can't, leverage sovereign, or you can't leverage the money, and you can't, how are you going to leverage the money? You can't print, or printing or not printing doesn't do anything at that point, because now you have a debt, you have, a deficit that can't be, that you can't undeficit it. You have to actually start and pay the bill. It's kind of like you can only run so far before you have to pay your bill. You can pay a piece of it, you can pay some of it, you can put into a payment plan, but you're gonna have to pay the debt. It's kind of like that. So the highest level as to where we are right now is at the sovereign level. Okay. Now, if some of these terminologies you have or haven't heard, I'm sorry about that. I'll make sure that I'm looking to make a dictionary for these terminologies, and just put it out there so that you guys can keep it with you. Next to be leveraged. Now, the only one way you can leverage is you're going to have to accept, all right, that you're in debt. The currency is not as strong as you're portraying it to be, and you're going to have to devalue. This is what happens. And so this is the stage that we are. We have the perfect, not sounds like it, not that it's good, but we have the perfect environment for this to happen from 20 to, or I'll put the 2020s. So I'm not saying next week the whole world is going to go to, you know, or I forgot the term they use, but the whole world is not going to just die of currency devaluation just like that. But rather, what it's going to do is going to open the door for us to get back into something more stable, which would be a gold standard system of some sort. Okay. which is what I'm expecting to see, because that's the only thing that can actually save America and actually the world. Okay. And so why did I bring this up? Now, usually what they do, coming back to gold, is they purposely devalue the value of gold whenever there is a financial crash. Why? Because people always run to putting their money into, gold, for example, which is the most known one, okay, to protect themselves from, the devaluation of the dollar or their currency. And so what many of the banks do, and you can find this out, especially from, I'll say, 2001 to 2011, banks like the Bank of England was selling 400 tons of gold every single year with the sole purpose to push the price down of gold, to discourage people away from this system of, physical gold. Anything they can do to push them towards paper gold or towards not having gold at all, and discourage them from having the weapon against, the government, is to do so. All right. So for me, it's interesting to see how this trade actually took place here. Now, you don't need all of this information in order to take this trade. However, it's good to have the background as to why, I'm in this trade, to see how what the price does with it. I could close with profit now, and it's still, for this account, I think this is a really good profit for such a small account, but still, I'm still holding on to it. So if I come back here to finish this off, how do you protect ourselves? So owning gold. Gold protects you. Is not created to give you ROI, but to protect your ROI. Written by Michael. I didn't get that from anywhere. I didn't listen to YouTube. This is my own writings upon writings of just studying and thinking, you know. So you can keep that down. All right. And number 3, okay, which is something we're going to get into, is, all right, looking at, as I would say, looking at commodities from more than store of value perspective. So I'll put this here, perspective. All right. So I'm going to whet your appetite a little bit. Now, what I really want to get into and what we're going to be going into is silver perspective. All right. Now, why is silver so powerful? The chemistry of silver allows for it to be used, and there's very high use cases for silver right now. One of the highest, and you can go and have a read for it. I'm not saying to go and buy silver, okay? Very high use cases, okay, for the future technology that we're getting into. One of the biggest one, which is the issue that we have in the world, is that oil is running out. It's not running out, majorly in the sense of, what how they've tried to describe it, but it is running out. Okay. And so for alternative energy, we have things like solar panels, which they're aiming to have on every house in the future. And so as a good investment move already, now if you get my newsletter, I'm gonna have a full breakdown report of pages with figures and stocks and different things different ways, because you don't actually have to, for example, buy gold, because gold is expensive. At the moment it's $1,793 a troy ounce, which is, it's a lot of money. So if you don't have that kind of money and you want to get in, there are other ways to get into gold. The wisest thing to do is that if you don't own gold, get into stocks that, mine gold, because they're definitely going to do well. That's a little tip for you there. But with silver, we have a scenario where it can be used as a store of value to a degree, but in alternative energy, solar panels are one of the things that are going to be probably most common. The same way we have lights, we're going to have solar panels in the future, okay, as a prevented. And there's other things with silver as well, but we will get into that. So these are the things that we have to look at. So I'm giving you the first 3. There's a longer list than this, but I just don't want to overload you. Assets, as a standard for money generation. Owning gold, definitely. Not created to give you an ROI, but to protect your ROI, okay? And then after we have, along with this, we're looking at commodities from, a store of value perspective. Now, let me answer Liz's question. If there are any other questions at all, please, guys, feel free. All right, don't be shy. We have many, many more conversations like this that we will do. So is deflation the same as devaluation? So let's do this quickly, guys, and then we'll end it off here. So I'm just switching charts to have more space. I think, wow, yeah. So if we go for devaluation, I love the questions you asked, which really is a really good questions, versus deflation. All right. So I don't know what I just did there. Devaluation. Devaluation there. Thank you. All right, so let's put the main characteristics of devaluation. So with devaluation, you can say in a sense that if deflation happens, things can be devalued. Okay, but the separation of them. So if I put devaluation here, all right. So what are the attributes of devaluation? When an asset, okay, becomes less expensive. All right. So in financial terms, when an asset becomes less expensive, and this can be by imposed market supply and demand, or it can be by intrinsic. For example, let's think about a car. All right, a car's value. Okay, and I'll put this here: supply and demand based. Okay, so devaluation is supply and demand based mainly, and then in a abstract sense, you can talk about it in the sense of, for example, if you have a car, for those of you who know, if you get a car, as soon as you drive it out of you know, the 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 car seller, the car place that you just bought it from, every mile you drive, or even just as soon as you drive it out, it loses value straight away in that sense. Okay. It's not because of necessary supply and demand. I guess it is because you've taken a car, so you've demanded, but I mean, things can devalue in that sense. So devaluation can take different faces when it comes to, like equities and assets and stuff. But when it comes to deflation, okay, this is fiscal policy and plus central bank policy. Okay. And this is the whole crux of what we're talking about when it comes to money, talking about how we can protect our families. Family members who are maybe old fashioned. For me, being African and Caribbean, my family is very old fashioned, both sides. Everything is about storing money. I mean, the best they get to is buying land in Africa or buying a house, which is not so bad, but they're nothing beyond that. So here in this, discussion, not limited to race or anything, but we're trying to, expand on, you know, being able to have a better perspective to protect our families, to protect ourselves, okay, for what's coming, especially in these 9 years. All right. So devaluation, okay, is supply and demand based. Okay, something can gain value or devalue when an asset it becomes less expensive, okay, or in this case, less expensive. All right. And it can be imposed, okay. It can be imposed, all right, or self-inflicted. What do I mean by that? Is that it can be something intrinsically wrong with the asset itself, which makes it to devalue, or it can be imposed from the broad sense of the market, where there's a broad agreement in the sense that that thing is not as valuable. Okay, so when it comes to devaluation, we're talking about that same term, scarcity. Okay, scarcity, or we can put the other word, rarity. Okay, so and you can have devaluation in many ways. For example, if the market cap of something doesn't change, for example, a crypto, but the number of tokens or cryptocurrency, representing that market cap increases, then you can have, a devaluation of the currency. They'll be worth nominally less, you know, per um, per crypto. But then on the other side, when we come to deflation, okay, deflation is a very is the financial policy and central bank kind of scalpel tools that they use to be able to manage what's going on. So with deflation, all right, we by definition, all right, we have a decrease in inflation. So this decrease in inflation has a couple. Now, inflation takes many different, faces as well. Okay, we have CPI, Consumer Price Index. It was going, which is we get our inflation about cost of things in prices from the Consumer Price Index. So if I put here, for example, CPI, all right, so cost of goods and services, okay, can go up or go down based on deflation. All right, and then also we have the other type, which is this the money, you know, change monies. I'll say currency. Currency is change of inflation rates. So as we said, for example, with your family members, tell them if you didn't know, for example, as we gave in that example with bond yields, if an interest rate of an account equals to, let's say the bank is saying, yeah, we're going to give you for the ISA, let's say an ISA, for example. I've done many of like help people open those. Okay. In when I was working in a bank, yeah, you have 1.5% per year. Okay. And funny enough, there's even a limit to it. One thing about assets is that there isn't a limit, but 1.5% per year is the limit per year returns. Now, if the interest rate percentage is 1.5%, okay, but then after you have, you know, the inflation rate for money, or the inflation rate right now is 3%, all right? So I'm going to put this here. And if we were to give an example starting with £10,000, all right, on the left hand side, after 1 year, all right, 1.5% of £10,000 is 150. So this is what you get nominal in, nominal value, okay? But then you have to factor in the fact that the inflation rate is minus 3%. So you lose 3% value. So if we go over here, we have a loss of 3%, which will be a loss of £300, so 9,700. All right. And I'm going to call this true value because buying power, okay, the currency, no matter how many numbers it is, like for example, the Japanese yen, okay, is 100. I think right now, $1 to Japanese yen is about 116. So $1 equals to 116 Japanese yen. Now that 116 sounds like, a massive number because it's a lot, but it doesn't actually mean it is worth a lot. Okay. And so just because we have numbers on the screen doesn't represent value. Value is what really, the buying power is what really drives everything and gives currency, or gives money what it's supposed to, which is that ability to exchange. Okay. Or it gives you the ability to exchange more or less based on what you have. So I'm going to put here true value. All right. So if we do a little quick calculation, I just pressed cancel by accident. Let me fix that. True value. If we mix these two things together and do a quick mathematical equation here, all right, we're going to end up with minus 9,700. It's going to equal to 9,850. All right. So in other words, you have a loss of £150 worth of buying power. Okay. And this is the deception that deceives so many people because, unless you understand these things, seeing is believing. If you see the value of your account balance go up, based on the fact that, and that the foundation set in place is that banks are safe, nothing can go wrong, currency is good, paper money is good, the digits on the screen is really money, all of those different things. With that kind of picture in mind, then, you've actually thought that, you have made for doing nothing, as, many people, when I used to work in the building society, actually, I won't name the name for the recording's sake, but they think that they've done well because they have 100,000 in there and they've made 15,000, 1,000, excuse me, 500 for the last 10 years. And so they have 15K and they feel like, yeah, for 10 years of doing nothing, I've earned 15K. Sounds good. The bank just gave it to me. They don't question why the bank gives it to you. Funny, in my 4.5 years, nobody ever asked me, how come the interest rate is so? Why do I get the money? What do they do with it? Nobody ever asks. They just say, yeah, 1.5%. All right, give it to me. Let's go. All right. So when it comes to these dynamics here between devaluation and deflation, I say the dividing line, okay, is one is based on supply and demand. The other is based on fiscal policy and central bank policy merged together or separated, but in collusion together. And, with this example here, all right, if the inflation rate was to change, then the true value of your money is to change too, or will change too, okay? Or the true value buying power that you have will change rather than the nominal. Banks trade your money too, exactly. They do a lot of things with our money, depending on what levels you put it into or whatever you do. But the moment you put your money into a bank, you've made an exchange, which is next week's lesson. Okay. But this is what we have here. Liz, does that answer your question? Is there anything on top of that you want to ask or at all? Is there any other questions, guys, too? Or was that okay? Great explanation. Thank you, Liz. Good. Ahmed said good. Oh, no worries, bro. Okay. Any other questions at all? I'll just give about 30 seconds. And then after we can call it time. Any questions at all? If there's no questions, type no so that I can end the recording and so that I know this is a long one. I might split it into two, but then I can give it. Is there any questions at all? If there's none, type no. No. Ahmed says no. No. Okay, no worry, name. Good to have you on. Tell the other students and stuff like that to be. And I know some of the students have exams, some of them no. Liz says no. Okay. Anyone else? Just make sure that everybody good. Yeah. No, not for now. Okay. Okay, cool. But you guys will get something you enjoyed it. Yeah. All right. Perfect. Okay. Nathaniel says no. Okay. So I'm glad you enjoyed that. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Okay. If you have any more questions after that, please post them for students, post them in the group. Next week, Thursday, we'll continue. All right. And I'll make these available. What I'm trying to do is I'm going to start editing these out and start, posting them on YouTube as kind of like a conversational podcast. Okay. So you can bring your family involved. Okay. This is information to share to the world. I really want to help people. Okay. I really want to make sure that everybody gets to understand this stuff so that you can be safe. Not everybody will listen, but at least you said something. At least you got the message out. So I'll capture you guys later. Anybody that I invited on, thank you for coming. You can drop me a message after if you have any more personal questions or thoughts. And you guys have a great time. Now, tomorrow, guys, be ready for the NFP. Live analysis session is on at 10 o'clock tomorrow. So be ready. I'll be live at 10. Okay, we'll do some analysis to look at the price and see if we can capture some trades. All right, or capture something from the market because it has been quite dry. Aside from the pound movement, which is another story for another day, we'll discuss it on Monday, what's going on there. But all right, but apart from that, we're good to go. So I'll catch you guys later. It was great to have you on. I hope you enjoyed that. And take care.